just come around and pick them up. So if you turn it in tomorrow, it's 10% off. Wednesday will be 20% off. Looks like you did a lot of research. Oh, okay.
I had to find the code.
I had to back
version. Yeah, those ones. But I just don't have very good handwriting.
Thank you very much. Okay, so what I want to do today is I want to lecture a little bit, and then we're going to go downstairs and we're going to take data on our pieces of planaria. And then we're going to come up and we're going to finish lecturing a little bit. Okay, so we'll take a little break, probably halfway through the class. Okay, so you'll notice this is the handout that I gave you when we were talking about taxonomy and phylogeny. And in this particular handout, there are some groups which we have not talked about. So we're not going over all of the phyla, all of the animal phyla. We're just going over the ones that have most of the species. So if you look at this, we didn't go over Centophora or Acela, right? We didn't go over Ectoprocta or Brachiopoda, okay? So the major ones we have just finished talking about was the organisms in the phylum Mollusca and Annelida. So one of the weird things about this particular cladogram is that the mollusks and the annelids are grouped more closely together than the annelids and the arthropods. And so when we think about the annelids and the arthropods, what two characteristics do they share that you would think might put them closer together on the phylogeny list? Yes. So the annelids are truly segmented, as are the arthropods. But the nematodes are not. So the nematodes we were just talking about, we just started talking about, these are the roundworms. And so this particular phylogeny is new. So this is the new one that they came out with that separates them based upon not their structure, but their molecular data. So when they look at their DNA, they notice that the nematodes and the arthropods are more similar in terms of molecular information than the mollusks and the annelids. And so they put them into a group, which is called the Ecdysozoa. And one of the reasons why they put them in this group is that they both have a very similar skeletal system, which is called an exoskeleton. So when we talk about the exoskeleton, we first see an exoskeleton in the phylum Nematoda. So the exoskeleton has some advantages, and we'll talk about more about the advantages and disadvantages when we get to the arthropods. But one of the major disadvantages of an exoskeleton is it does not grow with the animal. So the organism must shed the exoskeleton periodically in order to grow. And that shedding of the exoskeleton is called ecdysis. So ecdysis is the shedding of the exoskeleton in order to grow. So our little roundworms have to do that, as do the arthropods that also have an exoskeleton. So if you think of like a crayfish, or if you think of a spider, or if you think of an insect, in order for them to grow any larger, they have to shed the exoskeleton and replace it with a newer, larger exoskeleton, okay? So that's why the arthropods and the nematodes are ecdysozoans. Oops, nematodes. So they are animals that have to shed their exoskeleton. Okay, so we talked about the free living. roundworms. And these are found in the soil, for example. And these are really important because they, for example, eat bacteria and fungi and excrete nitrogen. So nitrogen oftentimes is a limiting resource for plants. And so having free-living roundworms in your soil is actually a good thing for your plants, right? However, one problem that we have is that plants are also susceptible to parasitic roundworms. So I mentioned before that you can use a nematicide on your soil to kill all nematodes. So people out at the Agricultural Research Station, for example, somebody might probably specializes in nematodes and how they parasitize plants, but also how they are good for the soil. And they probably are trying to figure out how you can promote the good free-living ones while reducing the risk of parasitic infection to plants. Now, we also have parasitic roundworms. And so there are some examples of these in humans. So for example, we have hookworms, pinworms. There's also, we'll talk about filarial worms, which are transmitted via mosquito bites. And the guinea worm is another example of a type of hookworm that is found in humans. Now, hookworms in particular were really, really common in the United States, specifically the southern United States, until they discovered their mechanism of transportation, which is that we are the single host for the hookworm, and then the hookworm releases eggs via our feces, and then it gets into the soil. And so if we happen to be walking or barefoot in soil that has human feces in it, we could potentially pick up the larvae as the larvae burrows in through the soles of our feet. So prior to sanitary mechanisms of disposing of our waste, we might have had outhouses, right? We might have also just had places where people typically went to defecate, and then we would be able to complete that life cycle. So cleaning up our waste products, our feces, and actually help to eliminate hookworms. They're not typically able to survive this far up north. So it really was kind of a southern problem. So we're going to talk about the hookworm life cycle. This is actually a picture of a nematode. This is actually, backing up a little bit, this is actually C. elegans. So in lecture last week, we saw a video of C. elegans and how they're used in the lab, how they're stored in robotic towers, for example, and how they're used to study development, including aging. And so the free-living nematodes are really have been really, really important in researching how animals develop and how they grow and how they age. Okay, so if we look at the hookworms, however, we see that there's about 1.5 billion people on this planet that have roundworm infection. And a lot of those are actually carrying hookworms. So even though we've cleaned up our North America, or the US, there are still kind of prevalent in the world at large, okay? So this is actually an image showing a hookworm, and a hookworm has a complete digestive tract, which means that it has a mouth and an anus. So this is very different than from the tapeworm that does not have a digestive system. So remember, the tapeworm completely lost its digestive system. And then flukes have an incomplete digestive tract. So they do have a mouth, but they don't have an anus. So this is actually the mouth. And so you can see that what it does is it latches onto the intestines, and it actually feeds off tissue, including blood. So it kind of just latches onto your gut, lining of your gut, and it feeds on that tissue. So if we look at the life cycle, right, the adult resides in the intestine. Eggs leave via the feces, and they get out into the soil. This is an example of a life cycle that only has one host, which is us. So from here, the larvae develop in the soil, and then what they do is that they burrow in through the skin. So they get into your circulatory system, and you would think that they need to go from like the bottoms of your feet to your small intestine or your large intestine. Generally it's the small intestine, but so they have to get from here to here. But instead of going directly to there, they actually have a unique mechanism. And so what they do is they actually go to the lungs first. So they burrow out through your lungs, and then you get a cough. Because if you have a parasite that's burrowing out through your lungs, you're going to produce a lot of mucus in that place where the parasite's burrowing out. And so you're going to cough up the larvae and then swallow them with your mucus. Okay. And that is how the larvae get into the intestine. Now, there's been a lot of recent interest in hookworms in particular, but maybe other types of parasites, because there's this new hypothesis that a lot of our modern day diseases may be due to the fact that we have gotten rid of our parasites. So we co-evolved with these parasites, which means that we evolved defenses and they evolved counter defenses. And so our immune system evolutionarily is primed to fight off these multicellular parasites. And so there are some diseases that are specifically seem to be due to the immune system not acting normally. So if we look at autoimmune diseases, so these could include things like happens to your digestive tract. So this could include Crohn's, where you get inflammation throughout the digestive tract because the immune system is kind of attacking that. You could also look at multiple sclerosis. What's another example of an autoimmune disease? Does anybody know any other examples? Graves' disease, which attacks your thyroid. What else? Which is the one that causes the butterfly-shaped kind of rash on the face? It's actually a worse disease that attacks your organ systems and kind of shuts everything down. It's kind of like, I think this would be one of the worst ones to have, lupus, because it attacks everything, your skin, like even your teeth start to fall out. Your immune system is just attacking your organs, right? There's also diseases that are like allergies, right? So like gluten intolerance or gluten allergies. So this is celiac disease, right? Where you get an allergic reaction in your small intestine and it kind of destroys the lining of the intestine. And then you can get all kinds of things moving into your body and you get what is called leaky gut. So things come out and then you can't absorb your food and you start to lose weight, okay? And then asthma, okay? So all of these diseases have actually become more predominant since we have gotten rid of our parasites. And so there is a hypothesis behind why these have become more predominant, and that is what is called the hygiene hypothesis. So that means that we have cleaned up our environment a little too much. This also relates to being exposed to bacteria. So using antibacterial soaps, you know, I remember when those just came out and everybody was using them, they were buying them for their house, right? Now it's like everybody's saying, do not buy antibacterial soap for your house. It's like really bad, right? Because we have good bacteria we don't want to mess with, right? Our good bacteria on our surface of our skin, but also in our digestive tract. But this is also the idea that specifically when you're developing your immune system as a child, you need to get dirty, right? So you need to be exposed to soil, eat dirt, right? Lots of baby animals actually eat their mother's feces. So if you think of like a deer or an antelope, the babies actually will eat the mother's feces in order to get the good bacteria inside of their gut. So it's really significant that we have cleaned up and kind of sterilized our children's environments, and that might be one reason why we have these more common, right? And then also we've gotten rid of our parasites. So there has been a lot of recent research of actually using what is called helminth therapy. And this is where you purposefully infect yourself with hookworm. And this isn't legal in the United States, but you could even go onto a website, you could Google it, and you could go onto a website and you could fill out a form, and you could, they probably tell you they can't send it to you in the United States, but you could go to other countries and get it. Like you could go to Mexico and get some helminth therapy. And this is where they actually send the eggs, which hatch out into larvae, through the mail, and then you infect yourself. Now, if I become infected with a hookworm, does that put you at a risk? If I'm infected with hookworm? Probably not, because of the life cycle. So if we look back at this life cycle, if I get infected, the adults are going to reside in my intestine, and then the eggs are going to leave via my feces. Well, our feces go, hopefully, well, actually, some of us probably might still have outhouses, or I guess when we're camping, this might be a problem. But if you use the bathroom, right, toilet, and it goes and gets filtered out, and so it wouldn't be a problem because my feces has to go back to the soil, and then the larvae has to hatch back out, and so you could not get a hookworm directly from me, right? So it would have to go through this series of life cycle. The other thing is, it's important to realize that if I got 5 larvae, so let's say I ordered through the mail 5 larvae, and I let them get into my skin, would I then end up with hundreds of hookworms in my body? No, right? Because of the life cycle. So I would only have 5 until they died of old age, which I think is something like 5 years, right? And then they would be out of my body. So people are finding actually that it helps quite a bit. So they're using it to treat Crohn's disease and some other diseases, some other really bad autoimmune diseases, but maybe even asthma and allergies. And so what they believe is that if the immune system doesn't have parasites to fight, then it finds something to fight. And what it does is it just kind of turns on normal, healthy tissue, right? And what it tends to do is it damp downs the immune system so that the immune system is not overactive. So they're doing this with hookworms, but there's also some ideas about using pinworms as well, besides just hookworms. How many people knew about helminth treatment for autoimmune diseases as a possibility? Okay. So if you know somebody with a really, life-threatening, really debilitating disease, this seems like it's way out there. But honestly, if you consider the other thing, which is, what do they give people who have autoimmune diseases? Does anybody know what's the big drug they use? It's not adrenaline. It's a really common one, but if you've ever taken, you know how it affects your body negatively. They give you steroids, right? So they give you what is called prednisone. And prednisone, if you take that for long periods of time, it can make you really, really sick, right? Prednisone causes it causes your body to swell, and because it decreases your ability to regulate your blood sugar level and can cause steroid diabetes and all kinds of other problems in the body. Okay. So you might take prednisone if, for example, you were in poison ivy and you had a really bad poison ivy rash. Sometimes the doctors will give you prednisone for that. Okay. So another example, and this is the one from your book. These are guinea worms. So these are the famous worms that actually burrow out through the skin in order to release their eggs. And so if we look at the life cycle, the adults reside in the intestines until the female is ready to lay her eggs. And then what they do is they typically go to the feet, and it creates a blister where they come out. So this would probably not be one that you would want to use for helmet treatments, right? Because this is really painful. And the reason why they come out as the feet is that when you're having this painful blister, putting your feet in water feels really good. And so the female actually waits until you put your foot in water, which might be a source of drinking water. And then the female will actually release her eggs. And then the larvae are consumed by these little crustaceans that are very much like the crustaceans that we fed our hydra yesterday in lab. So the crustaceans take them up, and then we drink those crustaceans, which contain the larva, and then they get back into our body. So this can cause, infection unless it comes out in one piece. So you can kind of have an immune reaction. And so this is why, even though they can get really long, what they do is they wind it around a stick, and this is actually a match stick if you look at it. And what they do is they wind it out and they just pull it out a little centimeter every day. They just pull it out, wrap it around the stick, and so you just walk around with this. You just have to pull it out, wrap it around, right? And so it can be very long, right? So it takes a little while to actually get it out of your body. Okay, so those are the guinea worms. Okay, so the last group are the filarial worms. The filarial worms are different than any of the worms that we talked about because they, as adults, do not reside in the digestive tract. So the adults reside in lymphatic vessels. Now, lymphatic vessels are different from your arteries and veins, so they're not part of the circulatory system, but they pick up fluid that is lost from your capillaries, from your circulatory system, and then they transport that fluid through the lymph nodes, and then that fluid gets dumped back into your circulation up near your neck. So the lymphatic vessels drain fluid in the body. So what happens when the adults reside in the lymphatic vessels is that they can cause immense swelling, right? So this is sometimes referred to as elephantiasis. Because the appendages can get so huge. So if we look at a person that did not get any treatment, you can treat this. So as soon as you notice swelling, you can treat it. And generally the swelling is reversed because you can take chemicals or pharmaceuticals that kill the nematodes, right? But if you do not treat them, then you can get this immense swelling in the body. And it's not like you can just cut off this swelling, right? You can't just cut off these places in the body because that is just tissue, right? That is muscle, that is your vessels, that's your nerves, that's everything. So you can't cut it off, okay? So that's an extreme case. So the question is, if it's in your lymphatic vessels, how does it get from one host to another? So how would you need to protect yourself from these? And so the answer is the mosquito. So the interesting thing is the larvae have a behavior where they migrate to the skin at night. So they migrate, and so night is when mosquitoes are out. During the day, they move back away from the skin. So it seems to be at night, they have this circadian rhythm. So they come out at night and then back to the lymphatic system during the day. And so then they're picked up by the mosquito. Okay. The larvae reside in the salivary glands. So they're in the salivary glands, so they're transferred from one individual to another by a bite. So you can pick up a filarial worm from a mosquito bite. Okay. The good news is that we have chemicals that can kill them. They also, recommend that you use repellent, insect repellent, and also protect your body. So like if you were in Africa or South America, you would try to prevent yourself from being in places where there are lots of mosquitoes and you're getting lots of bites. Okay, so that is the endoparasites, the nematodes. So the next phylum that we're going to talk about are the arthropods. And arthro in this case means jointed. Poda means foot. And so these organisms have jointed appendages. They are also segmented. So just like the annelids, they're segmented internally as well as externally. They also have an exoskeleton. So if we look at some of the advantages of the exoskeleton, so I'm going to write, I should put here, exoskeleton. The exoskeleton is composed of chitin. And chitin is actually a polysaccharide of glucose. So it's actually a sugar. So it is very much like starch. And it's also like cellulose. So plants use cellulose for their structure. And so chitin is a structural sugar. We can't actually eat or digest. We can eat it, but we can't digest it and break it down. So we can't get the glucose out of it. So just like with cellulose, it would be fiber. So if we're eating arthropods, if you're like eating, I don't know who would do this, but if you're like eating shrimp and you eat the whole thing, right? You're not actually going to be able to break down the exoskeleton of the shrimp because it's composed of chitin, and we do not have the enzymes that can break it down, right? So it would just be fiber in your diet, which helps to move things through. Yeah.
Are there enzymes that exist to break that down?
I believe so. I believe there are, but I don't know who has them. For a while, chitin was promoted as a dietary aid. So people were eating chitin, like they eat fiber, but it can cause things to move, just like any fiber, it can cause things to move too quickly through your digestive tract, right? And then you get diarrhea. And then, so it wasn't a very good diet aid. So there were diets that were chitin-based. Okay. So the advantage of the exoskeleton is that it is protective. Right? Think about it. It is body armor. The other advantage to the exoskeleton is that it is waterproof. Right? So Oh, my husband always yells at me about this. Water resistance instead of waterproof. It's like, this is waterproof. He's like, it is not waterproof. It's water resistant. So it's probably more like water resistant, right? But they prevent dehydration. Right. So these are the invertebrates that invaded the land, right? Invasion of the land. They can live in very dry places. So if you think about grasshoppers, for example, right? They can live out in the desert. There are, however, very much disadvantages to the exoskeleton, and that is that it is heavy. So this weight probably limits its size. So we don't see huge arthropods roaming around, specifically in the terrestrial environment. The largest arthropods are in the ocean. So if you think about giant lobsters and giant clams, those are not clams, giant crabs. Those would be examples of arthropods that would be heavy, but they're also buoyed by the water, right? So the larger arthropods live in water. There are some pretty big beetles, you know, that are like this, that fly through the tropical rainforests, but they don't get much bigger than this, right? The other problem is that they must shed the exoskeleton when growing. So if we look at the way that this works, is that you have a hard outer exoskeleton, which is the old, right? And before it actually sheds the old, what it does is it makes a new, larger exoskeleton underneath. So it is folded like this, and this is the new exoskeleton. So the thing about the new exoskeleton is that it is soft and it generally is not pigmented. Right? So if you see a pill bug and it is white and you're like, ooh, that must be a new species because it's white, what you're probably seeing is that pill bug just molted. It just came out of its old exoskeleton. It's got its new exoskeleton and it is soft and it has yet to get its pigmentation. And so this is a real problem because this is where they're at greatest risk, right? If you just come out and you're all soft, anything that touches you can actually permanently deform you. So you might have seen dragonflies that are flying around and their abdomen is like got a big hook in it. And you're like, what happened to that, right? Problem is that when it had first emerged, something happened to its abdomen that made it go like that. And then when it hardened, it was stuck like that. And so it is never going to molt again because when dragonflies do their final molt, that is when they go from being aquatic to terrestrial. And so they're kind of stuck with that and they will not be able to mate, right? And so they're kind of stuck with that for the rest of their life. So that's a major disadvantage to having an exoskeleton is the way that it grows. Okay. So if we look at all of the different arthropods, so this, it shows a pie chart of all of the animal species. We probably have a few more than this. This is a little bit dated. But if you look at the groups, let's just mark out the arthropods. So this is other arthropod classes. Okay. Here's your mammals right there. Here's your other chordates, your sponges, your cnidaria, your flatworms, your nematodes, your mollusks. There's a big one for mollusks. What are the most diverse mollusks in terms of number of species? What group? Bivalves, cephalopods, or gastropods? gastropods, right? Gastropods live terrestrial, freshwater, marine, most diverse, okay? So then we have the echinoderms, minor phyla. So we're talking about this, right? In terms of the number of species, this is the age of arthropods. This is not the age of mammals, right? Here is the mammals, right? That's the mammal group. So in terms of the diversity of all the animals, the mammals are the biggest. And then if you look at which arthropod is the most abundant, Coleoptera. What do you think that is, just from looking at the picture? Beetles. So beetles are actually the most abundant arthropod on the planet, okay? Also because they live in water, you have water beetles, you have terrestrial beetles, you have beetles that live underground, right? So they're the most diverse in terms of that. Okay, the next one is Hymenoptera, and that would include the ants and the termites, but it would also include the bees and the wasps. So that's the next most abundant group, it looks like. Oh, wait a minute, no, Lepidopterans are more than that. 112,000 species. Okay. So what is this? This is a trilobite. Are they around today? No. No. When did they first come around? Cambrian explosion, right? We talked about the Cambrian explosion. So the arthropods are believed to have arose during that Cambrian explosion when they developed this exoskeleton and these segmentation in the jointed appendages. Okay. So I'm going to stop there, and we're going to take a little break before we talk about the major arthropod groups. So we're going to go downstairs, so you can leave your stuff here, except if you have that piece of paper for taking your data. So from your lab, if you happen to have that piece of paper. If not, I'm going to go print some more out. So once you get down into the lab, grab a dissecting microscope and a light. And then what you want to do is find your segments. And we're going to give them a little bit of water too. So the last person out, you just close this door. You got it?
If it was 1/3, I'd probably leave it. So the 7 this month. If it gets there, no one's back. I'm going. I'm thinking this much. Maybe I'm a little.
Sometimes I run outside. It's been a while since I've done that.
Yeah, I mean, you're here. Do you have time to? And if you just start at 20 to drop at 27. And then it's what I built and showing you. Also, it's like fine. But that's pretty sad. So, one of the leads from Las Vegas. That's interesting. They should be Las Vegas. They're terrible. They're like only 15. It's not that bad. The girls are worse. The girls have one. Like in this drawing hands and is just real bad.
Wait, Susie, what is going on? Yeah. So you have to do something.
What school you guys talking about?
It's Tuesday. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so this is such a huge phyla that instead of breaking things down into classes, we do what are called subphyla. So actually, you know, underneath phyla, there's a subphyla. Underneath each class, there's a subclass. Each family, there can be a subfamily. There can even be subspecies, right, which are actually of the same species, but they're slightly different. And so we're just going to talk about the major subphyla within this group. Okay, so the first subphyla is called Myriapoda. So if you think of myriad, like if there's a myriad of number, how many, what does that mean? Many, right? So think many-footed. They have a myriad of feet, okay? So Myriapoda. So what do you think are some examples of organisms in this subphyla? Centipedes and millipedes. Right. The millipedes that I thought were going to be like this, that were like this. Okay. So when we look at the difference between the centipedes and the millipedes, the millipedes are actually herbivorous. And as such, they do not tend to have very complex sensory structures. So they're just eating debris and plants in your garden. But the centipedes are carnivorous. So centipedes means that they have 100 legs. So really, they only have one leg per segment. So one leg per segment. Milla means they have millions of legs, right? So they actually have 2 legs per segment. And the reason why they have 2 legs per segment is that the segments have fused. And that's one of the characteristics of the arthropods is that you get the fusion of the segments, and then you can actually also get specialization of legs. So the carnivorous centipedes have poison glands. And they also have complex eyes because they hunt their food. So you have to be a little bit careful when you when you're digging in your garden, you come upon a centipede. You might not want to handle it, but millipedes are pretty, they are not dangerous at all to handle. Okay. So some examples, if you want to look at some images from your book. So oops. So this is the millipede. So you notice that each segment has 2 legs, right? This is the centipede. Each segment has only 1 pair of legs, but they have this antennae, and then they have these complex eyes, and then they have fangs. So they have a jointed appendage that they use to pierce your skin to sting its prey. Okay. So how many of you have seen this organism in your house? Yes. So these guys like come out at night. I don't know if you noticed this, but you turn on the light and all of a sudden they squirm away. And one of the really interesting things about these guys is if you pick them up, their defense strategy is to shed their legs. So oftentimes you'll end up with legs if you try to pick them up to move them out of the way, harm's way, for example. You'll actually end up with legs, and the legs still move, right? And that's a defense mechanism because they think the predator might not come after them if they're looking at the leg that is moving, right? So these are little centipedes that live in your house. This is called the house centipede. I'm not sure what they eat. I haven't looked that up. That's the house centipede. Okay. Okay, so the next subphyla, that was Myriapoda. We then have Chelicerata. That's Chelic, Chelicerata. So this includes spiders, scorpions, ticks, mites, and these, which are horseshoe crabs. So the Chelicera, in this particular instance, like for example with the spiders, the Chelicera are modified appendages that are able to inject toxin into their prey. So this is a group that tends to have a fusion of the body segments. So if you think of about a spider, for example, it has a head and a thorax that are fused, and then it has an abdomen. So it tends to just have two main body parts. So we'll put that down. Two main body segments. All of them tend to have that. I think even scorpions have a head and a thorax that are fused, and then the abdomen. So if we look at some examples of this, so this would be the mite, the scorpion. Here's the head and the thorax of the spider, and then here is the abdomen. Now, spiders are a separate group, so they're actually a group. They're arachnids. And so if we look at spiders, I just want to talk about spiders in a little bit more detail because they're very interesting. Spiders have 4 pairs of walking legs. That is as opposed to insects. So insects only have 3 pairs or 6 total. So you can always tell if something's a spider or an insect by looking at the total number of legs that they have. They also have a specialized gland, which is called a spinneret. And the spinneret is what produces silk. So this is the silk gland. And this is on their abdomen. So silk is very interesting because it is so strong, right? So they're thinking about producing silk in mass so that we can use it to produce things like body armor, like for like soldiers and police officers and other things. One of the things that they've done is that they've taken the gene that codes for silk and put it into goats. And then the goats can produce silk in their milk, right? So silk is actually a liquid until it comes out, and it is acidified when it comes out, and it turns into a solid. So the silk is used for a variety of things, and spiders are known for their web building. So some of them are sit and wait predators. But they also use their web to produce a egg case, right? So the silk is used to produce an egg case. So sometimes you see egg cases around the end of the summer. Sometimes those overwinter, and then the eggs will hatch out in the spring. They also use it to produce a molting web or a molting case, actually. So sometimes if you take a spider structure and you open it up, you'll see these legs and other structures inside of it. And what that is that the spider went inside there to molt its exoskeleton, and then it came out and left its exoskeleton inside. So that was a molting case. Okay, so if we look at spiders, we can tell the differences in their sex by looking at the structure of their pedipalps. So if we determine sex in spiders, okay, there is one jointed appendage that is in front of the 4 walking legs. So if you look at here's 1, 2, 3, 4 walking legs. This is called the palp. So the palp is small in females. The males have what is called a pedipalp. So this is enlarged in males. And this is actually their copulatory structure. So rather than using their penis to transfer the sperm, they actually use their pedipalp to transfer the sperm. So here is the pedipalp, and it actually looks like a little boxer's glove. So you can see it, it kind of looks like this. It's like a little mitt, right? So it kind of looks like that. And this is what is used to put into the female's reproductive tract. So this is its copulatory structure. Now, why do you think they might use a appendage near their head rather than their penis, which is near their abdomen, to transfer their sperm?
Does it have to do with like their development, like their evolution?
Nope. So they can see, right? So this prevents what we'll call sexual cannibalism. So, so spiders are carnivorous. All spiders are carnivorous. And so they capture their prey. And so the male uses its pedipalp to transfer the sperm rather than getting really close to the female, where he would have to stick his penis into her reproductive tract. So the way that they do this is that they produce what is called an ejaculatory web. Is produced. The male ejaculates into the web. And then he transfers the sperm via the pedipalp. So he sucks it up into that syringe-like bulb and then transfers it to the female. So this is an example of internal fertilization. But you could almost call it indirect copulation, right? Insects do not do this. So if you think about like a praying mantis, which kind of has the same problem, the praying mantis has to get close enough to the female that he can have direct copulation rather than indirect copulation. So we'll call this indirect copulation. Okay. Both male and female spiders have this structure that is called the Chalice Array. And so the Chalice Array is what actually has the poison gland. So the Chalice Array is a modified appendage with poison gland. Modified appendage. Okay. So this is the appendage, and then they also have complex eyes. So the eyes are single lens eyes that can see images very much the same way that we see them. Okay. So if we look at some examples of spiders that you might recognize, this is a very common one around here. This is kind of a little furry and is called a jumping spider. So jumping spiders are interesting because they are not sit and wait predators. So these are active hunters. So you could almost think of them as the equivalent of a cat or a wolf in a terrestrial ecosystem. So they actually go out and hunt their prey. And so hence they have these really nice eye structures that can see. And in fact, if you pay attention to them, when you walk into a room, they actually follow you. So they track your movement, okay? This would be the Chalice Array. So those, in this case, are bright green in this particular species, which is called I can't remember how to pronounce that. And then they have these pedipalps. So this would be like a male. Okay. So if those weren't present, then you would know that it was a female. This is another example. I think this is a wolf spider. This is a male, and he has very enlarged, obvious pedipalps. So one of the things that these active hunters, the jumping spiders, have in common is that they tend to have complex courtship. And they actually use the coloration on their legs and their bodies to communicate. And a graduate student discovered that you can actually show them videos on a television screen. They'll watch the television and they will respond back to the TV screen. So they're kind of trying to figure out what is the language that the jumping spiders are using. So I'm just going to show you a couple of, or just a short video. This will be the last thing that we'll do today. Looking at spider courtship dances. These also have sound with them, so they're quite impressive. Peacock spiders are just another example of jumping spiders. I do have this theory that's kind of interesting. In all the houses that I've lived in, I either have jumping spiders or wolf spiders. So either jumping spiders have taken over the house or wolf spiders. And so I don't think that they kind of live together very well, because I think that they would be competing for some of the same prey species. So you could notice whether or not you tend to have jumping spiders or wolf spiders in your house.
Do spiders eat each other?
You know, I don't know if those two fight. These guys, you see them stalking flies a lot and hunting other organisms.
Spider silk with the scent of a female. He just needs to follow it. Wherever it leads him.
Oops.
Other males have gone on the same quest and have come to a grisly end. Here's the female, and she doesn't look very amorous. In fact, she kills every male who doesn't match up to her expectations. What can he do to win her over? Dance. Dance for his life. He will need a show-stopping trick to avoid becoming lunch. With his fan unfurled, he begins an ever more complicated series of dance moves to try and seduce her. At last, she succumbs to his advances and allows him to mate with her.
So you notice his head is right down by her abdomen.
He matched her expectations. But she kills him anyway.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
I'm gonna be here tomorrow.
You just slide it under my door. Yeah, if I'm not in it. I might.
Thank you.
Yeah. Nibble on you. Technically considered that a big one, but it's still a whole bunch of just, things are
I saw that, but I don't know if he's now switching. I don't think he would because we barely finished gas.